London, 1821. The grand chandeliers of Ashworth Hall spilled golden light across the polished floors, but it failed to warm the chill coiling in Lady Evelyn March's chest. Shy, reserved, and painfully aware of the whispers following her through the ballroom, she hovered near the far wall, a delicate teacup trembling in her gloved hands. Across the hall, laughter and chatter swirled around the most notorious figure of the season, Duke Adrian Blackthorne. At 34, his presence commanded attention, whether he wished it or not. Yet tonight his eyes scanned the room with the detached curiosity of a man observing creatures in a terrarium. Evelyn had no interest in being observed. Marriage, society, and the endless games of polite intrigue were things she endured with quiet patience. Still, as the orchestra struck the opening notes of a waltz, she dared to glance across the hall and accidentally collided with the Duke himself. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as his coat brushed hers, and the wine he carried spilled in a crimson arc across his pristine sleeve. All eyes turned. "How utterly careless, Miss March," the Duke said, his voice cold and precise, carrying across the room like a blade. His gray eyes, stormy and unyielding, pinned her to the spot. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn's heart stuttered, but she lifted her chin and met his gaze. "Perhaps, Your Grace, one might learn caution if one spent less time judging others and more time watching where one steps." Her voice was barely audible, yet it carried a strength that surprised even her. A murmur ran through the assembly. No one had ever dared answer the Duke back in such a manner. His lips twitched, but not in amusement. "Bold words from a lady no one notices," he said, turning on his heel and walking away, leaving Evelyn's pulse hammering in her ears. The room exhaled, the moment passed, and yet, something in that collision, brief, accidental, incendiary, had shifted the air between them forever. 3 weeks later, Evelyn March would find herself standing over the same man in a dimly lit chamber of St. Bryce's Hospital. As he struggled to rise from a carriage accident that had left him unconscious and vulnerable. And in that moment, the woman he had insulted at the ball, the quiet, overlooked introvert, would become his only hope of survival. Have you ever underestimated someone based on first impressions? Comment below who you think holds the real power in this story, the Duke or Evelyn. Evelyn March had never been one for society's grand spectacles, yet here she stood again, balancing a teacup as if it were a lifeline. The March estate had raised her to be proper, obedient, and unobtrusive, qualities that had earned her the polite indifference of most London gentlemen. Her mother, Lady Clarissa March, fretted endlessly over her daughter's prospects. "Evelyn, do compose yourself. You cannot spend your life in the shadows while the world spins around you." Evelyn smiled politely, adjusting her delicate lace cuff. "I am content, mother," she said softly, though her heart was a quiet storm of anxiety and self-doubt. While others sought wealth or title, Evelyn's deepest desire was simple: a life where she could think freely, speak carefully, and find meaning beyond ballroom whispers. Her father, a retired naval officer, admired her mind but often warned, "The world does not reward cleverness alone, Evelyn. Caution is the currency of your sex." Evelyn had heard it countless times, yet in her chest a stubborn flame of independence refused to be extinguished. Across town, Duke Adrian Blackthorne had spent his life surrounded by expectation, wealth, and scrutiny. Known for his biting wit and social arrogance, few saw past the polished exterior. Behind the sharp suits and sharper tongue, Adrian carried the weight of a title he neither desired nor understood. He had learned to mask kindness with detachment, empathy with calculation, and loneliness with indifference. That fateful collision at Ashworth Hall, however, had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He could not ignore the memory of Evelyn's cool defiance, the clarity in her eyes that had dared to meet his own. For the first time in years, someone had looked past his title and seen something of the man beneath. Evelyn's friends, few as they were, noticed her peculiar fascination with literature, quiet reflection, and measured words. Miss Clara Hensley, a bright-eyed companion, often teased, "Evelyn, your mind is sharper than a sword, but I fear you wield it like a dagger at the wrong moment." Evelyn laughed softly, yet a twinge of unease remained. Her life, predictable and sheltered, left little room for surprise until fate intervened. A letter arrived at the March estate, gilded and bearing the seal of the Duke himself. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Curiosity warred with hesitation as she tore it open. "Miss March," it read, "I hope this letter finds you well. It is not often that one encounters someone who meets one's gaze without flinching. I would request the honor of your company at St. Bryce's Hospital in the coming days. There is a matter that requires your attention." "Eh?" Blackthorn Evelyn's hand trembled. Why would the Duke, so impossibly arrogant and indifferent, seek her out? Though fear whispered caution, something in her chest stirred, a quiet intuition that her ordinary life was about to collide with his extraordinary world. 3 days after the Duke's letter arrived, London awoke to an unsettling commotion outside St. Bryce's Hospital. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the cobblestone streets, and the usual bustle of horse-drawn carriages was punctuated by hurried footsteps and muffled shouts. Evelyn had been quietly arranging books for the hospital's reading room when a sudden cry echoed through the hall. "Make way! His Grace has been injured!" Her heart skipped. Injured? The Duke? Before she could think twice, a group of attendants carried a limping, bloodied figure into the hospital's east wing. Evelyn's eyes widened as she recognized the unmistakable silhouette beneath the folds of a crumpled cloak. Duke Adrian Blackthorn, a doctor, grim and efficient, emerged to assess the situation. "A carriage accident on Greystone Avenue," he explained to the concerned onlookers. "His Grace has sustained a head injury. Movement must be minimized. He will remain here under constant supervision." Evelyn felt a strange, magnetic pull toward the injured man. Without understanding why, she stepped forward. I can help," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I have experience assisting patients with head injuries. I can ensure he remains calm and comfortable." The doctor glanced at her, surprised. "Very well. Alert me immediately should there be any change." Adrian lay on a narrow cot, unconscious, his usual imperious presence replaced by vulnerability. His hands twitched occasionally, and a faint groan escaped his lips. Evelyn's pulse raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. Carefully, she adjusted the damp cloth on his forehead, wiped the stray blood from his temple, and settled a book in his lap. A book she thought might pique his curiosity once he awoke. Hours passed. Each time Adrian stirred, Evelyn read aloud, choosing passages of poetry and literature with a quiet reverence. She marveled at the strange intimacy of tending to a man who had insulted her only weeks before, whose reputation had preceded him like a shadow. Yet as she watched him, she realized that beneath the Duke's arrogance, there was something fragile, something human, and he depended on her now, utterly. When his eyes finally fluttered open, gray and stormy, they fixed on her with effort and confusion. "Where?" he murmured, voice rough. "St. Bryce's," Evelyn replied softly. "You were injured in a carriage accident. You must rest, Your Grace. The physician says you will recover fully, provided you remain still and calm." A flicker of recognition crossed his features, followed by the ghost of a sardonic smile. "Miss, March," he croaked. "You helped me?" "Because no one should suffer alone," she answered gently, surprising even herself. "Not even those who mistake arrogance for strength." For a moment, Adrian's gaze lingered on her. Then he closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him. Evelyn felt a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest. She had entered his world reluctantly, yet now she was its anchor, his unexpected savior. Days turned into a delicate rhythm at St. Bryce's Hospital. Evelyn arrived each morning, gloved hands carrying fresh linens, carefully chosen books, and a quiet determination that belied her modest demeanor. The Duke, stubborn even in weakness, tried to maintain his usual hauteur, but the injuries and confinement stripped away his carefully constructed armor. "Must you fuss over every detail?" Adrian grumbled one afternoon, attempting to sit upright despite the doctor's warning. "You risk undoing your recovery," Evelyn replied calmly, securing the blanket around his shoulders. I am not fussing. I am preventing you from worsening your condition. Adrian's gray eyes softened for the briefest moment, though he masked it quickly with a wry smirk. You have a remarkable talent for saying what no one else dares. Perhaps that is why I tolerate it. Their interactions, initially formal and cautious, began to evolve. Evelyn discovered small glimpses of the man behind the title, a love for poetry that rivaled her own, a sharp wit that could match hers in dialogue, and a curiosity about the world that betrayed his reputation for indifference. In turn, Adrian noticed Evelyn's quiet bravery, her intelligence, and the surprising steadiness of her heart. Yet the path was not smooth. The hospital staff whispered, observing the unusual closeness of the pair, and Adrian's friends, particularly the calculating Lord Harrington, watched with thinly veiled amusement. Careful, Blackthorne, Harrington said one evening as he visited. A lady such as Miss March is easily misunderstood by society and by you. Adrian only allowed a faint, skeptical smile. Misunderstood? Perhaps, but she is far more interesting than those who line up at my door, hoping to capture a title. Meanwhile, Evelyn wrestled with her own doubts. How could she, an overlooked introvert, find herself at the center of the Duke's world? She feared the whispers, the judgment, and the inevitable return to the rigid expectations of society. And yet, she could not ignore the strange satisfaction she felt when the Duke sought her counsel, when he lingered to listen to a passage of poetry, when he allowed her quiet authority in the room. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Adrian groaned from his cot. Evelyn approached, damp cloth in hand, and caught him off guard. Do you require assistance? She asked, her tone gentle but firm. He met her eyes, vulnerability breaking through his usual arrogance. Perhaps. I do, he admitted quietly. It was a subtle confession, a chink in the armor, yet it sent a thrill through Evelyn. For the first time, the Duke Blackthorne, a man who had insulted and dismissed so many, was entirely reliant on her. She felt the weight of responsibility, but also an unexpected exhilaration. Tension mounted further when news arrived that Adrian's recovery might be delayed by complications from the accident. Each day, Evelyn balanced care, patience, and subtle negotiation with doctors, family, and the Duke himself. The closeness of their time together sparked small, undeniable shifts, a shared glance lingering too long, a quiet laugh over a poetic jest, a hand brushed unintentionally against hers as she adjusted his pillow. Society's expectations, Adrian's pride, and Evelyn's caution loomed like shadows, testing the fragile bond forming between them. And yet, beneath the surface, something undeniable grew. Trust, admiration, in the stirring of a connection that neither had anticipated, but both could not ignore. It was on the fifth evening of Adrian's convalescence that the quiet tension in the hospital room shattered like glass. Evelyn had been reading aloud from a volume of Byron, her voice steady, her hand occasionally brushing a loose strand of hair from Adrian's brow. Suddenly the door creaked and a messenger entered, bearing a letter sealed with the Duke's personal crest. Adrian, still pale but regaining some color, accepted it with a frown. Evelyn watched curiously as he broke the seal. His expression darkened in an instant, his gray eyes storming like the clouds outside. Evelyn, he muttered, his voice low and tight. This cannot be. She leaned closer. What is it, Your Grace? He hesitated, then tore open the envelope fully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its contents official and damning, a notice of scandal, circulated through the city's gossiping elite, claiming that Adrian's accident had been no accident at all, that his carriage had been sabotaged by a rival family intent on ruining his name and fortune. Evelyn felt a cold jolt. Adrian, usually unflappable, looked raw, stripped of composure. They want to destroy me, he said hoarsely, his fingers clutching the letter as if it were a lifeline. The Blackthorne legacy, all I've worked for, gone if this spreads. Her heart clenched at the sight of his vulnerability. For the first time, Adrian's arrogance had vanished, replaced by fear and desperation. Evelyn's mind raced. How could she help him navigate this storm without betraying her own cautious nature? You're not alone, Your Grace, she said gently. placing her hand over his. "We will find the truth. Whoever did this, they underestimated you. And me." His gaze softened in a way it rarely did, lingering on her with a strange intensity. "You, you would help me?" he asked, disbelieving every word. "Yes," she replied firmly, "because the world may have underestimated us both, but together, perhaps we can prove them wrong." It was a turning point. Until now, Adrian had been dependent on her for physical care, for comfort. Now she became his partner in defense, his confidant in a battle he could not face alone. And as they plotted a strategy to uncover the truth behind the sabotage, Evelyn realized that she felt something stronger than admiration, something akin to hope, trust, and perhaps affection. Adrian, in turn, could not ignore the clarity and courage in her eyes. She was no longer the timid introvert at the ballroom's edge. She was decisive, brilliant, and unyielding. She had, without intention, proven herself indispensable, and in that moment, both recognized a terrifying truth. Their fates were entwined, whether society, pride, or circumstance liked it or not. The days following the revelation of sabotage were a relentless torment. Adrian, already weakened from his accident, now carried the weight of suspicion, betrayal, and the gnawing threat of public disgrace. Every whispered rumor in London felt like a dagger aimed at his family's legacy, and every unfamiliar visitor to St. Bryce's Hospital set his nerves on edge. Evelyn moved tirelessly by his side, but even her steady presence could not mask the rising despair that clung to them both. Adrian's pride, once so impenetrable, now became a source of agony. He lashed out in frustration, snapping at staff and even at Evelyn herself. "You don't understand," he barked one stormy evening, his fists clenched against the edge of his cot. "If this scandal reaches the papers, if my enemies succeed, everything I am, everything I've built, destroyed." Evelyn flinched at the venom in his tone, but she refused to retreat. "I understand more than you think, Your Grace," she said softly, "and I will not let them win. But you cannot fight this alone, or with anger clouding your judgment." For the first time, Adrian's gray eyes, usually sharp and commanding, filled with helplessness. "I am failing. My family, my title, myself. You should have left the moment you realized who I am, what I am." "I am not leaving," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling only slightly. "You needed help when everyone else turned away. You need it now, more than ever." Yet even as she spoke, a cruel twist of fate struck. Lord Harrington, Adrian's old rival and the one whose influence spread much of the rumor, arrived at the hospital under the guise of concern, but with the intent to humiliate. He questioned every move, every precaution, and planted seeds of doubt in Adrian's mind, suggesting that even Evelyn might be swayed by sympathy or fear rather than loyalty. Adrian's hands shook with helplessness and anger, and Evelyn saw the man she admired most crumbling under pressure. She realized that her intellect, courage, and compassion might not be enough to shield him from the full force of the conspiracy. That night, as the rain lashed against the hospital windows and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the walls, Evelyn sat quietly beside Adrian, her hand brushing against his. He stared at the ceiling, silent and tormented. I fear I cannot recover from this," he admitted in a voice raw with despair. "Even if my body heals, my name, my honor, gone." Evelyn swallowed her own fear, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Adrian, you are stronger than you know, and we will not let them define who you are. But you must trust me. Trust us." He turned his stormy eyes toward her, vulnerability and defiance warring within him. For the first time, the Duke of Blackthorn, the man who had insulted, ignored, and charmed countless women, was utterly exposed, dependent on another's courage and care. And Evelyn, standing at the precipice of fear and responsibility, realized the enormity of what lay ahead. If they failed, everything he had, everything they had begun to build together, could be lost forever. The storm outside had eased, leaving a crisp chill that seeped into the hospital corridors. Evelyn moved quietly through the East Wing, carrying a stack of papers and a journal she had found hidden in Adrian's study before his accident. A journal filled with careful records of family dealings, correspondences, and notes about enemies who might wish him harm. As she entered Adrian's room, she found him sitting upright for the first time in days, his gray eyes searching hers with a mix of determination and vulnerability. The despair that had clouded his features seemed to flicker, replaced by something sharper. Focus. I reviewed the letters you found, Adrian said quietly, his voice still raspy from weakness. And you were right. There are inconsistencies that point to deliberate sabotage. I cannot ignore this any longer. Evelyn set the journal down beside his bed. You don't have to face it alone, she said simply. We can gather evidence, confront those responsible, and clear your name. Together. Adrian's lips curved into a faint, almost shy smile, the first genuine one since the accident. Together, he echoed. The turning point was not sudden. It grew from small, decisive actions. Evelyn suggested sending discreet inquiries to reliable allies in the city, tracking the origin of the forged letters, and observing the suspicious activities of those who had long coveted the Blackthorn fortune. Adrian, usually impatient and brusque, listened carefully, valuing her counsel in a way he had never done with anyone else. In these quiet moments, their bond deepened. Conversations that had once been limited to polite exchanges or casual reading turned into debates, shared plans, and even laughter. Soft, unguarded, and rare. Adrian found himself admiring not only her intellect and courage, but also the grace with which she carried herself under pressure. Evelyn, in turn, saw the Duke's sharp mind and protective instincts behind the mask of arrogance, and she realized the man she had once considered haughty and untouchable was capable of profound loyalty and kindness. Late one evening, as Evelyn prepared to leave after a long day of strategizing, Adrian called her back. Wait, he said, his voice tentative but firm. I need you to know something. She turned, meeting his storm-gray eyes. Yes. He hesitated, as if measuring the weight of his next words. I don't know how I could have endured this without you. You've not only saved me from harm, but from despair. Evelyn's heart tightened. And you've shown me that even someone so formidable can be vulnerable, that even titles and pride cannot protect us from human frailty. For a fleeting moment, silence stretched between them, a charged electric pause where their connection, unspoken yet undeniable, hung in the air. Neither of them moved, yet both felt the shift. The battle was no longer only against external forces. Their partnership, trust, and emerging feelings would be the key to overcoming what lay ahead. At last, Adrian nodded toward the door, but his expression softened further. Tomorrow we act, and tomorrow, I will need you by my side, every step of the way. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. You will have me, always. It was a promise neither fully understood yet, but both felt its weight. The tide had turned. From despair and helplessness, they had found her clarity, courage, and unity. The morning air was crisp as Evelyn and Adrian rode in a discreet carriage toward the estate of Lord Harrington, the architect of the rumors and sabotage that had nearly destroyed the Duke's reputation. The city still slept under a gray mist, and every passing shadow reminded Evelyn of the stakes. They could not fail. Adrian's hand brushed against hers briefly, a silent reassurance. This ends today, he said, voice low but resolute. Evelyn nodded, her own nerves steadied by their shared determination. At Harrington's estate, the tension was immediate. The Lord himself appeared, feigning surprise at their arrival. Adrian Blackthorn, Miss March, he said smoothly, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? Adrian's gray eyes were stormy, unwavering. I've come to settle the matter of your lies and schemes, he said, his tone as precise and commanding as his reputation. The forged letters, the whispers, the attempts to manipulate my standing in society, they end now, and you will restore what you have tried to destroy. Harrington's smile faltered slightly, but he masked it with arrogance. And if I refuse? Adrian stepped forward, unwavering. Then I will ensure that every piece of evidence you've planted comes to light. Your actions have consequences, and I have the means to expose them fully. And you will answer not only to me, but to every authority and ally I call upon. Evelyn, standing beside him, felt the thrill of empowerment. She had collected proof, cross-referenced letters, and prepared accounts of witnesses who had seen Harrington's manipulations firsthand. She handed a bundle of documents to Adrian, who glanced at them briefly and then locked eyes with Harrington. "This is undeniable," Adrian said, his voice calm but full of authority. "I suggest you reconsider your next words carefully." A tense silence followed. Harrington, realizing the trap he could not escape, finally bowed his head in reluctant concession. "Very well," he muttered. "Everything. I will correct it. The letters, the public notices, all shall be withdrawn, and reparations made to restore your honor." Adrian allowed a small, victorious smile, turning toward Evelyn. "We did it," he murmured. Evelyn's cheeks flushed, but she returned his smile. "We did. Together." Later, back at St. Bryce's hospital, Adrian reclined in his chair. Exhaustion mingled with relief. He watched as Evelyn tended to the final details of correspondence and arrangements. "You've been remarkable through all of this," he said quietly, almost in awe. Evelyn looked up, meeting his storm-gray eyes. "And you've shown me a side of courage I never expected," she said softly. "One that is not measured by titles, but by the choices we make when the world turns against us." For the first time since their acquaintance began, Adrian allowed himself to relax fully, his pride softened by gratitude and admiration. He reached for her hand, holding it with careful tenderness. "Evelyn, I owe more than my reputation to you. I cannot imagine a future without you by my side." Her heart quickened, but she spoke with calm certainty. "Then do not imagine it. Let us face it together." The clouds outside the window had parted, allowing a warm beam of sunlight to fall upon them. In that light, the Duke and the quiet introvert, who had once collided so awkwardly at a ballroom, stood united, not just in triumph over scandal, but in a bond forged through adversity, trust, and undeniable affection. Their eyes met, and the unspoken understanding was clear. Whatever the world demanded, they would face it, side by side, as allies, as equals, and as something far deeper than either had anticipated. Weeks had passed since the scandal was resolved. London society buzzed with whispers of the Duke's vindication, yet the true story of his survival and the quiet hero who had saved him remained known only to a few. Evelyn March walked through the manicured gardens of St. Bryce's Hospital, where she had spent so many anxious days beside Adrian. The flowers were in bloom, their colors bright and comforting, as if the world itself celebrated the hardships that had passed. She paused to watch children laughing nearby, recalling how her voice had once brought comfort to them and to the Duke alike. Adrian appeared beside her, moving silently, yet with the presence of a man entirely at ease in his own skin. He offered a small, tentative smile that slowly deepened into one of warmth and affection. "You've changed everything, Evelyn," he said, his voice soft but full of certainty. "Not just for me, but for yourself, for all the lives you've touched." Evelyn tilted her head, meeting his gray eyes. "We changed everything together. I simply did what needed to be done." He took her hand, entwining their fingers. "And yet what you did saved me in more ways than one. I once thought titles and pride defined a man. Now I know that courage, loyalty, and love define him far more." A gentle silence fell between them, filled with mutual recognition of the journey they had endured. It had begun with an insult, a collision in a crowded ballroom, and had grown into an unbreakable bond forged in adversity, trust, and unexpected devotion. Evelyn's lips curved into a smile, tinged with both shyness and certainty. "And now," she asked, "what comes next?" Adrian's eyes softened, his usual controlled composure giving way to genuine warmth. "Now, we write our own story, together. No wagers, no schemes, no world dictating our path. Just you and me, and whatever the future holds." The breeze carried the scent of roses and fresh earth, wrapping around them like a promise. Evelyn felt a thrill of joy and anticipation, knowing that whatever challenges the world might present, They would face them as equals, as partners, and as something far more profound than either had imagined. As they walked along the garden path, hand in hand, London shimmered in the late afternoon light, a city full of endless possibilities. For Evelyn March and Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Westland, the collision that had begun in embarrassment had blossomed into love, trust, and a partnership that would endure far beyond the whispers of society. In the quiet of their shared victory, one truth remained undeniable. Sometimes the person you least expect becomes your salvation and your greatest joy. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.